A new documentary is on release now in Australia, a documentary called Mozart's Sister. Everything you wanted to know about Mozart? No, it's about his sister. Fascinating story. And it's my great pleasure to be speaking to the director of Mozart's Sister, Madeleine Heatherton-Miau. Madeleine, welcome to Movie Metropolis.
Thank you for having me.
Now, this is such an interesting story about a woman who is not that well known, but deserves to be. Please tell me how the documentary came about.
So, some years ago, I came across a really interesting article about Mariana Mozart, which surprised me because, of course, Wolfgang Mozart is, one of the most well-known composers in the world, and it fascinated me to know that there had been a second Mozart, who had also, as a child, been considered a prodigy herself. And so, of course, my curiosity was sparked as to who was this other Mozart and what had happened to her.
Okay, so tell me about obviously lots of research that you did, the finding out about her and incorporating that into the film.
Yeah, so it actually took quite a long time to finance the film. So
Uh,
the good thing about that is I've actually had years and years to really dive into the research. So, um, I mean, the film itself goes to some of the really premier kind of researchers to the Mozart family story. So we go to Salzburg to the archivists and musicologists in Salzburg. I speak with a number of authors and historians. I speak with a lot of musicians. And prior to filming, I had read as much of the original research material as I could. So the Mozart family were prodigious correspondents. There's over 700 letters that they wrote to each other. There's a great deal of kind of original commentary around Mozart and the family. And of course, like a lot of biographies have been written about Mozart over the years, and some of them touch on the family and those early years where Mariana Mozart, Nannerl Mozart it was a part of the performing duo that toured Europe for years and years. So all of that was kind of part of my research process before we got to making the film.
okay. And it's interesting you mentioned earlier it was difficult to finance the film and to get production going, which is always an issue in when you make a film.
Oh yeah, it's a very rare filmmaker that says the money just came. Um, I mean, there's a competitive process, obviously, because every film is fighting for its reason to be, and needs to prove it's that there's an audience that's interested in hearing about it. I think with this one, although there's a great deal of you know film and television and writing and commentary around Mozart. I think with this one also, I guess the bar to entry was also, well, is there enough of a story there to really speak, to make a film about Mariana Mozart? And I guess there was a great deal of doubt that she was an interesting character and had made a contribution that was significant enough for people to be bothered.
Yes, and you certainly put the case very strongly that there is a case. So well done on that. And I also like the way, apart from all the interviews and research and everything that's been done, that you have some actors or people standing in, so that almost gives it a sort of a docudrama feel to it as well.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think we needed to really evoke and try to experience a look into those lives. I became really interested in their lives as children, partly because that's where their musical overlap is the strongest, but I think also because the beginnings of life of those children's musical education, of their performance relationship, of their composing is so interesting to sort of try to unpick. And of course, like they were like each other's sort of like main performance partner for decades, and they also, apologies for the noise, they also learnt, like they were both taught music by their father. Leopold started with Maria Anna. She was nearly 5 years older than Wolfgang, so she was the first student in the household. It's interesting also because if you just look at children or you reflect on your own experience of growing up. Like young children like to play together, they were fabulously talented. So I think that we can reasonably expect that there was sort of, a musical dialogue between them, certainly a performance dialogue between them. And it's not that big a stretch to also think that maybe there was some composing dialogue going on between them and that they were influencing each other and suggesting things and testing things and playing to each other as they were learning music theory, extemporizing and composing.
Yes, exactly. And there's also the element, of course, especially at that time, where it was not regarded sort of appropriate for women to have careers or to be prominent in the music sphere in particular, and that certainly comes out in the documentary.
Look, it's absolutely true that there was no pathway for women professionally, or really in any kind of particularly public facing role, and to still be respectable. And we have to understand the Mozarts were this sort of thin artisanal class that were struggling really to survive. Leopold's letters are endlessly full of discussions around money and how they will manage money, what they can reasonably expect to be paid and what they will spend when they travel. Like he was a very controlling and pedantic character, but he was a magnificent producer in a way. Like the logistics of how he took his family on the road for years are
Mm.
something to really admire. And although as the children grew up and wanted to, be fully adult and make their own decisions, he was, clamped right down on that. But he's an ambivalent character. I think he's very interesting. I don't think they could have possibly had the careers that they would have had without him. At the same time, later in life, he became this kind of very controlling force, particularly on Wolfgang and on Maria Anna too, because um, it was both society and Leopold closing the doors on her life.
Aha, how very interesting. I was wondering, as I was watching this documentary, I vaguely remember seeing, oh, it must have been about 10 years ago or maybe more, a feature film called Mozart's Sister, which was produced in France. I wonder if you knew about that and whether you used any of that.
I do. I watched it a few years ago, and I found it really interesting. I found it very beautifully shot, and the story about how it was made was interesting. It takes significant biographical liberty with the story because in it, Maria Anna has an affair with the Dauphin in France, and there's all kinds of things going on.
Yeah.
It's not historically accurate, but it was certainly interesting as a kind of evocation of a potential storyline of a playful twist on history and it's fully dramatized. So it's not pretending to be biographical fact. It's an exploration of a kind of
Mm.
a parallel fantasy universe. So in that spirit of it, I think it's a wonderful film. But I didn't look to it for historical accuracy or factualness, other than I was quite interested in the costuming because they obviously had really researched the fashion of the time.
Okay. Um, Interesting to hear that. Now, in your documentary, I love the way you use music, so much of her music, that sort of thing. It's a terrific part of the film.
I mean, yes, of course. I mean, no Mozart story is complete without, like a thorough kind of like looking at them. And there's so much music too, as well. So the film narrows its gaze a bit to sort of music that really sort of had some kind of interesting kind of intersection with Maria Anna's life or Wolfgang's life. So we look at the very early music that they were learning as children, the notebook that Maria Anna was given as her first musical book. It's a book that was enormously precious to her. She kept it her entire life. It's become part of the historical record because it has like the pedagogy of Leopold about how he taught Mariana and then Wolfgang. It also holds Wolfgang's earliest recorded compositions, which were very proudly inscribed by the father. And as one participant in the documentary interview says, it's interesting, isn't it, that even at that stage, that the boys' compositions were recorded and marked in the book, but none of the kind of, extemporizing or improvising that Maria and Anna was doing was recorded down. So I think it's also interesting for what it doesn't record. We also look at some of the early compositions, like the First Symphony, because there's such an interesting story about how that composition happened, which was that Leopold was extremely sick, and the children were left alone in an English house, and they had to be completely silent, not play their instruments. And in that absence of being able to make noise and play as children, they sat down and did the quiet activity that was available to them, which was to compose a symphony. And Maria Anna was the notator on that in the conventional record, but the film just explores, well, she was 13, he was 8, like what would that musical conversation has been? Was she just a silent scribe, or was she more of a participant than we've
Mm.
fully kind of considered before in that composition? And then we follow through to some of the later compositions of Wolfgang, which are clearly his, but he wrote them for his sister. And they show her brilliance as a keyboardist because of the technical skill and the kind of dramatic kind of virtuosity of them. So I think what we chart is their kind of ongoing relationship, and I guess the great respect and joy they had in each other's skills and how they encouraged each other and showcased each other.
Yes, it certainly does that. Such an interesting story, and as I said, little known, and as you quite rightly say, the feature film takes liberties.
Lots.
Of course.
But many biographies do. And of course this documentary too is through, my interpretive lens. But I have really thought about that and tried to go to people who've spent decades in understanding and researching the Mozart family lives and music. And I think that it's a fair portrayal of what was happening. But it's, of course, no biography, no film escapes somebody's framing of the story. And I think that, my reading of the earlier biographies, a lot of them are very skewed towards a particular framework. The Enlightenment themselves, way back in the 18th century, completely discarded women. It was like we were coming out of a period of religious thinking, which had positioned women as very much an underclass. Science sweeps through Europe at that time, bringing fresh ways of thinking about the world and opening up and trying to move past superstition, but not for women. It really doubles down on the women. And now both religion and science are telling women that they are a second-class citizen. So it's so hard to really fully comprehend that until you start reading those materials.
Mm.
And that was one of the big surprises, actually, how difficult it was for women to have independence and to be recognised fully for their potential and for their achievements.
Yes, and certainly your documentary reveals that, and yeah, fascinating stuff. So tell me about the editing process, because that obviously is always a difficult part of any documentary, and you had a lot of material and so on. How did you decide what stayed and what had to be deleted?
Um, well, because of the nature of this one, I had a pretty good plan going into the shoot. So I knew that we had a series of interviews with really key participants. I knew that we would be looking at certain documents. We went to Salzburg and went to the Mozarteum and to the Archbishop's archives to look at the original manuscripts and autograph scores. So we sort of had a plan. And then I had these dramatic recreation scenes, which I, planned ahead of time as well. So, but it is also true that you're never entirely sure what people are going to say in an interview, and everyone's free to put forward their opinion, and you have to adapt as a filmmaker and flex and make and follow the information as it comes in. So the film, although there was a plan in place, of course, it shifted and flexed with the information as the shoot progressed. But there was a chronology of the film, and then there was what people said. So the chronology stayed the same because we knew the major parts of the Mariana's life. It was really kind of what the participants, what the subjects said that kind of we shuffled with. The biggest change is probably that Alma Deutscher, who initially was sort of just an interview and some footage of her. I'd planned her just as an interview and someone who would just sort of sit towards the end of the film who would speak to the modern situation for female composers and female conductors. She's just become much more important in the film. So she really frames the film. She now narrates the film. And so I guess that was probably the biggest change from the planning to the end. So in the edit, um, initially we just edited through the film and I had a sitting at the end. But because the material was sort of very strong, it just sort of kept creeping earlier and earlier. So over the course of the edit, we sort of just kept bringing her forward and forward until now she sort of sits in regular parts through the film, sort of framing it and inviting us to kind of look at the story.
Okay, well done on that because it works so well, and it tells such a good, she and others tell such a good story. It's great to have a film like this screening nationally. In fact, now it's screening nationally in Australia. What was the process like of having it released so that people can see it?
Yeah, well, we are really fortunate. We're out nationally this week. It'll have a short release, so if you want to see it, I would advise seeing it this week. Most cinemas are doing a 1 week only screening program, but it's in every state and every capital city. And if you look up Mozart's Sister documentary, that'll take you through to screening times and locations. It's being wonderfully distributed by Sharmil Films and Bonsai Films, who are specialists in art house film distribution and independent film distribution in Australia.
Yeah.
And it's a film that really lends itself to being seen on a big screen with beautiful sound. There's just so much incredible music with all kinds of, orchestras around the globe, from our Australian Brandenburg Orchestra through to the Strauss Vienna Kapelle, through to the Royal Academy of Music in London, like just wonderful orchestras playing incredible music. So I really, can't say more strongly, go see it in the cinema. And of course, the locations were stunning, and it's a visual feast as well. So something to really enjoy and treasure over a weekend viewing, maybe perhaps for audiences.
Absolutely agree. It's quite a comprehensive and visual and oral treat, Mozart's Sister. So, Madeline, I'm just intrigued. What got you into filmmaking in the first place?
Oh, what a good question. Well, actually, I actually started life as an architect, so
Ah,
I studied architecture. Um, I think, and then I kind of sort of fell into filmmaking because other friends were studying filmmaking and it just seemed so interesting. And documentary I loved because it's a way to explore and interpret the world. Just to me, there's nothing better than kind of just finding a topic and diving into it, and then being able to produce something that is both sort of informative but emotional about what you've discovered, and doing it with other people, the collaboration that you have on filmmaking, it really appeals to me. And then, of course, sharing it with an audience. There's nothing better than having this kind of discussion around something that you think is fascinating and deserves more attention.
okay. Were there any particular filmmakers in the documentary sphere that maybe influenced you?
I mean, so many, really. I mean, I guess the ones with really individual voices are always fascinating. Something that elevates it out of just pure kind of reporting is always interesting. So that they're telling a story, but their kind of interpretation is clear. Like people like Werner Herzog, of course, absolutely wonderful, kind of very kind of personal and individual filmmaking. I mean, look, actually, documentary is really having a feature documentary is really having a moment at this time with the streaming channels bringing it to the fore. So it's not like literally, there's not a one. There's like literally hundreds of incredible filmmakers out there. Um, and I think also documentary now, it itself is leaning into kind of a lot of dramatic storytelling conventions, as drama storytelling leans into some of the documentary story conventions. So I think there's this very interesting mix at the moment happening. And Mozart's Sister probably reflects that in terms of the way that we've blended dramatic recreation and theatrical performance and kind of classic documentary making. So yeah, I mean, I think documentary has come a long way from its early starts, and it's in a really interesting spot at the moment.
Yes, I absolutely agree, and yours fits in there really nicely. So, just my final question then, Madeline. Are you working on another film at the moment?
Yeah, I am. It'll take years to finance. It's usually a couple going at once. So I am, and having now kind of like dipped my toe, so to speak, in kind of the historical music story genre. I'm really intrigued to see if I can do a bit more there, because if there's an interesting history, can be so interesting if we can make it feel relevant and timely to the present. And so, yeah, I'm very keen to kind of see if I can kind of dip back into history and bring something else up to the present.
look forward to seeing that. It sounds great. We've been speaking to Madeleine Heatherton-Miau, who's the director of Mozart's Sister. Go and see it in cinemas across Australia right now. Madeleine, thank you so much for talking with me.
Thanks for having me, Peter. It's been a pleasure.
All the best. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.